In episode 3 of the Essence of Entrepreneurship, we are going to talk about entrepreneurial skills. Vineet, in your opinion, what kind of hard skills and soft skills does an entrepreneur quintessentially requires?
So in the first part, maybe let me talk about some personality skills, or whichever way, hard or soft, which are pretty essential in my mind. So I think the first is really grit. You know how gritty you are. So, and determined is quite not the same. It's really grit, your ability to deal with complex situations, to be able to rise up, just be persistent. You have to be persistent with your idea. So grit is right up there. And all entrepreneurs will have this in common, I'm sure. The second I feel is people, the ability to deal with people, right? The ability to build teams. You're building your own teams. You're dealing with customers. You're dealing with investors. So it's people all along. So if an entrepreneur can't deal with people effectively, and people have different ways, by the way. Some have a little bit of more abrasive style. Some have nothing wrong with either style, but whatever works for an entrepreneur. But I think ability to connect, deal with people is fundamental. You're not going anywhere. So if you're not fond of dealing with people, don't choose to be an entrepreneur, right? Third, I feel, is ambiguity. Some people like things black and white, right? They're very comfortable. So entrepreneurs always are dealing in zones of gray, right? Very seldom will you find things as black and white. Some people have a tough time dealing with ambiguity, and entrepreneurs should have this skill to be able to deal with ambiguity. 90% of the time it's going to be some shade of gray. The situation will be some shade of gray. It's not going to be straightforward, and you have to then decide which way do you want to go, and how do you sort of make it more black or more white, or and the last is really, which ties into the first one, to grit, is your ability to be okay with failure. Don't take it personally, and sort of keep bouncing back, keep on it. So that's a little bit on the personality side. You can use different words for it: emotional intelligence, soft skills, whatever. But I think these are really hard attitude things which you acquire over a period of time. You don't acquire these over 6 months or 9 months. Some of these are built into the way you grew up and the way you interacted with people in school, or so a little bit more difficult, especially things like grit, etc. But there's a body of literature now coming to say that these can be built in institutions. Especially, I think ability to deal with people can be built. I firmly think that, right? We have barriers to communication, and if it needs very good coaches, it needs very good people who can help these, but those can be built. Then I think some of the other skills which are more easier to build, maybe in the category of what you called as hard skills, would be, I feel, communication. All entrepreneurs have to be great communicators, and communication is not just about language, but really how effectively and simply can you tell your story quickly, right? So nowadays you also have the storytelling workshops for entrepreneurs, which I think is a good thing. But how quickly and effectively can you communicate? And a lot of entrepreneurs speak good language, but they are not essentially great communicators. And there are some who are not probably as good with language, but can communicate their idea very subtly. So ability to communicate, because you're really a salesman or a saleswoman all the time. You're selling, you're constantly selling. And it's no different when you're building things like a show called Plaksha. You're constantly sort of selling to the students, to the faculty, to the people who want to contribute. So communication is essential. Again, can be built. The second, today I feel, for an entrepreneur, your ability to network. How can you open up your network? And not network also sometimes has a negative connotation. I don't mean but the ability to sort of leverage build great relationships, your ability to network, how can you leverage that? Again, this is something that can be built, right? The third, I feel today for every entrepreneur, all your selling and marketing is happening on social media. So, and social media is becoming more and more a science. How do you manage different networks? Performance marketing kicks in. How do you build great websites? How do you organically convert from websites? So this whole art and science of social media and performance marketing, I think every entrepreneur has to know. If you don't get into the weeds there, the likelihood of your success is so much more diminished. And fourth, I feel all entrepreneurs should have a very instinctive sense about money, especially if you are building a for-profit venture. I'm an engineer by training, so I never studied a balance sheet in my life, and I became an entrepreneur very early. But what I acquired, which has stood me in good stead, is you have to have a very strong focus on how money is coming in. To put it very simply, how money is coming in and how money is going out. It's as simple as that, right? And often accountants who read balance sheets don't have a sense of that. They have a very good sense of numbers and balance sheets and all of that. But what is fundamental to business eventually is how revenues or money will come in and how revenues will be spent. So entrepreneurs need to have a very strong sense on that, right? You can't manage a P&L without a strong sense of that. And if you instinctively have a good sense of that, then you can, so whatever you may call it, finance 101, accounting 101, whichever way one can teach that. But having a very strong sense of finance and money is absolutely critical. So these four, or and maybe there are more, I would qualify as a little bit more hard skills, social media marketing, finance, and the first two that I mentioned. So these are, I think that's quite a bit already. So maybe these are what I would really qualify as essential. You can qualify them in soft and hard, whichever way you would like.
That makes a lot of sense. And the skills that you've mentioned, maybe some are born with it, maybe some are not. But what is, according to you, the way to develop these skills?
Well, I think grit, which I started with, is absolutely essential. One way to build grit is, in college and school, you have all of these opportunities for extracurriculars. Sport, by the way, builds grit very well. If you get into organizing events in college, that builds grit, because that also builds your ability to work with people. Sports builds this ability to take failure. But more or less, I think if there is a curriculum that has a lot of project work where you are working in teams, then your ability to work with people, take failure, developing grit. So working in teams, experiential learning is really one way to build a lot of these skills. Communication, again, reading, writing is essential, but a lot of storytelling, being able to present, projects which involve this, going out, speaking to strangers, being able to sell your story. Social media marketing, in fact, can be taught in coursework very easily. And I think every entrepreneur should be taught this. How do you market? So, how do you use performance marketing? Because, your organization will need it from day one. Ability to understand finance, money, again, can be built through coursework. So I believe that 70 to 80% of it can be built with effective curriculum, and then some is very intentional intervention, but some of it has to do with the way you are sort of brought up and the way your life experiences were. But colleges can really do a great job in shaping this curriculum. I believe our Center for Entrepreneurship does a great job. And recently I was spending time and I saw the list of courses that you all have crafted with a lot of practitioner faculty, if I may say, people who've actually, and those are outstanding. I mean, I would love to sit in some of those classes. So a lot of it can be taught, and I would say you can be trained on it. You know, some of these things you learn by doing. So it's like riding a cycle. You can't read a book and ride a cycle, right? You have to sit on the cycle and fall a few times. So, or learning swimming, you know, you can't read how to swim and then become a swimmer. So, a lot of the entrepreneurial skills are learning by doing. And but the good news is a lot of it can be inculcated and taught.